Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Think Legal Conversations. Today I'm chatting with Leigh Govender, an attorney who specializes in children's court matters. Leigh, thank you so much for joining me and for allowing me to ask you a few questions regarding the children's court.
Thank you, Merv.
Right. So a lot of people don't always understand the children's court, and a lot of people are very, very intimidated by children's court. So I thought I'd ask you a few questions regarding the children's court. Some of them may seem very, very basic to you, and please do forgive me for that. But I would like our listeners and the people watching this to get a bit of a better understanding about really the fundamental basics of children's court, so that if they ever do have to deal with children's court, that they know what to expect and how it works. So Leigh, thank you so much. And let's start over here, I suppose. What is the status of the children's court at this stage? As an attorney who spends quite a lot of time there, is it a user-friendly court? Is it an efficient court? How are the courts functioning at the moment?
So I think on the first point, in terms of it being user-friendly, it's definitely user-friendly in that if you don't have representation, you'll be guided quite well by the clerk as to what you need to do. In respect of efficiency, I think it's like every other court in South Africa. Things take very long to be heard. In respect of getting a court date, COVID obviously worsened the problem, so we're sitting with that now. But yeah, it's user-friendly, but I think efficiency in terms of court dates, getting the matters wrapped up, that's a bit of a delay. That's what I found.
Well, I suppose that's what we see everywhere in all the courts in South Africa. And look, I think the important thing is that the job is done and the job is done right, rather than quickly just pushing a sausage machine and getting matters out. Not that doesn't happen in some courts, obviously.
Yes.
Let's quickly talk about jurisdiction. So obviously every magistrate's court is a seat of the children's court. If someone were to go to children's court, or if they want to go to children's court, how do they choose which children's court to go to? Which court would have jurisdiction, as it were?
So the children's court you would need to approach is the courts in the area where the children are residing. So if the children reside in Roodepoort, you would approach the Roodepoort Magistrates Children's Court. If the children reside in Randburg, you would then approach the Randburg Children's Court. So even if you, for example, as the mom reside in Johannesburg, but the dad and the children reside in Kimberley, you would need to approach the Kimberley Children's Court because that is where the children are based. So jurisdiction is purely based on where the children reside.
Oh, excellent. And I know that you had to fly down for Kimberley for just such a matter for a few times, and luckily you were able to resolve it.
Yeah.
So you have a first-hand experience of that, I suppose. Right. So in order for someone on the street to approach a children's court, what do they have to do? Is there a specific form that they need to complete, or how do they go about it?
So generally, when you go to the children's court, you would speak to the clerk and say to them that you'd like to refer a matter to children's court. They will ask, what are the reasons? Is it perhaps for a parenting plan or an investigation into the care and well-being of a child? Then they'll provide you with a Form 2, which you will then need to complete. If you are underrepresented, they'll also give you a form for an affidavit, which you can complete yourself and get commissioned. And you then complete that form, hand it back to the clerk. The clerk will then obviously give the file to the magistrate to make a determination. And obviously the form you will then receive back to be served on the opposing party is what we call a Form 4. But to answer your question in a nutshell, it's a Form 2 that we use to refer matters to children's court.
Okay, excellent. And the Form 2, I suppose, is something that you get when you go to court.
Yes, so you can download it also from the Justice website, but I wouldn't advise against that. Those forms could possibly be outdated. So I would rather physically go myself, ask the clerk for the correct Form 2 for that particular court. It's usually the same Form 2 all around, but I would just get it from the clerk of the court that you're approaching.
Absolutely. And what documents you generally attach to the Form 2? Because you don't just lodge the form on its own, hey?
Yes, so if you're going to go and lodge the Form 2 or get a copy of the Form 2, it is advisable to take with you the birth certificate of any and all the children involved in the proceedings. I always say preferably certified copies. You can also take the originals along for just in case, together with a copy of your ID, who's the applicant or the complainant in the matter, and then also perhaps an ID copy if you do have of the other parent who's going to be a party to the proceedings. And then, like I said, you can go with an affidavit already prepared that would need to be commissioned. Or if you're going to fill the affidavit out at court, then you can do that. Just ensure you have the necessary documents you want to attach. You know, if it's WhatsApp messages, old parenting plan that was drafted, etc., that type of stuff's also relevant.
Well, absolutely. And I think here one must also caution people against two things. Number one, a lot of children's courts only take new applications on specific days, as you previously indicated to me. And then also number two, I think one must caution people against just sitting at court and filling those things in, because you do have to apply your mind. You don't want to do a rush job. It is very, very important stuff. So it might be worthwhile for people to go collect the form, take it home, fill it in, and then take it back with their supporting documents. Right. So here's a question, you know, from an attorney's point of view. Is it best to represent oneself in children's court? Is it worthwhile to get an attorney? Because obviously we know as attorneys, we are alive to the fact that legal representation is very, very costly. What are your views on this?
So I would always advise people to rather have an attorney. If you can afford it, even if you can't afford it, you know, there's places like Legal Aid that assist. Reason being, the attorneys understand the law. Perhaps there may be relief granted which you don't understand, which perhaps could be the incorrect relief. And if you have an attorney can alert you to that. An attorney can then also take active steps to bring the matter to finality, steps you may not be aware of because you don't understand the law. So I would always tell people, if no matter what court you're in, children's court, maintenance court, rather get an attorney to assist. We do understand the law better than lay people on the side of the road. So it just is advisable to rather get an attorney to assist you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's horses for courses. You obviously do this stuff daily. I know that you're in children's court three days a week type of thing at this stage. So let's say, for argument's sake, someone decides not to take an attorney, but they do want to take along a friend or a neighbor for moral support. Can they do that or not?
So children's courts is a court known in camera, so you can't, it's much like domestic violence courts and maintenance court. You can't just take random people into the court with you to sit in on the proceedings. Generally, the only people who are allowed into the proceedings, and it's dealt with in terms of Section 56 of the Children's Act, it's generally only the magistrate, the social worker that gets appointed to the matter, the stenographer, the clerk of the court, the parties to the proceedings, so i.e. mom and dad. If it's necessary that grandma and grandpa sit in, that is obviously allowed, and then the children themselves. So they're not going to allow a random neighbor or a friend to sit in for support. The person would have to wait outside. So it actually just makes sense now with COVID to rather just go on your own so that you don't take up unnecessary space at the courts.
Absolutely. Look, even though it's not precluded, so one must obviously distinguish between the courtroom itself and the passageway outside the courtroom. You know, depending from some courts, I suppose there might be some limits of people going in with COVID, but there's nothing really in the law that prevents people from having a friend sit outside in the passageway as a shoulder to cry on, etc. You mentioned that the children can be present at the court appearances in the children's court. Is it wise to take children, though? Is it necessary to take children?
So you'll actually see from the Form 4 that you'll receive back from the clerk of the court, which will then be served on the respondent in the matter. So if it's dad or mom, it does particularly normally state that the kids are not needed on the first appearance. The magistrate will indicate whether or not the kid should be brought to the next appearance, because it may be that a social worker will want to speak to them. But if they aren't required to be there, I would advise parents to rather leave the kids at home. You know, it is a traumatic experience. Kids shouldn't be subjected to that which they can be protected from. And also, you know, it's days out of school. Children's court runs on a weekday. So if you're taking kids out of school unnecessarily, you're also just hindering their progress. So if it's necessary to bring them, please do bring them along. But if not, rather let them stay at home.
Absolutely. Okay, then I've got two more questions for you, Leigh. The first one: what should I expect on the first court appearance at Children's Court? What should people prepare themselves for on this first day going to Children's Court? Considering the fact, that most people don't spend a lot of time in court, and it is quite nerve-wracking going to court for the first time. What should they expect?
So I think I'll just start with the basics. Obviously, it's dependent on a case-to-case basis. But firstly, arrive early. Arrive at 8 o'clock or 8:30. You'll see on the form it sets out what time court starts. Please do arrive at that time. It's very important that you respect the time of the court. Secondly, immediately go to the clerk of the Children's Court just so that you can tell them you are present for this matter today. They can then take your name off on the court register. And then it's just really a waiting game. It's a hurry up and wait for your matter to be called. You may be before 12, you may be called after 12. So just come with also a lot of patience and perhaps just some water to keep you hydrated.
Absolutely. Okay. And is it quite common for matters to postpone on the first appearance? I know a lot of people complain about matters postponing. It does seem to be the order of the day in a lot of court cases, isn't it?
Yes, so it's very common for the matter on the first appearance to be postponed. I've had some matters which postponed for longer than a year before it reaches finality. So it's very common for your matter to be postponed on the first appearance, especially if it's for an investigation into the care and well-being of the children, because the postponement is necessary for the clerk to have to appoint a social worker to investigate the matter. So I've rarely attended matters where it gets heard and finalized on the first appearance. It's not common at all.
Well, I think it's important for one to contextualize that as well. It's a very good point that you raised there. Some matters can go up to a year plus. It doesn't necessarily mean that the system itself is not working. Obviously, we know there are constraints and delays, but it's not just a case of postponing for the sake of it. Very often, you need further reports, you need investigations. Parties might want to postpone to try and settle the matter. So I think people mustn't get disheartened if the matter postpones on the first appearance. I always liken Children's Court, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, to being, it's not a journey with an end destination. The actual journey is the destination. It's about restoring relationships. It's about cultivating and working on relationships between parents and grandparents and obviously the kids. So I've got one more question for you, just in closing. What is your advice to someone going to Children's Court for the first time in their life, not knowing what to expect? What is the golden nugget piece of advice that you would like to give to them?
So I think it would be, if you're going there, if it's for the first appearance itself and it's not necessary for an application, preferably try and get an attorney, on call before you go to the appearance so that you can go with a bit of legal representation. An attorney, obviously, we are used to the court environment, so we'll be able to put you at ease. But if you're going to go there unrepresented, just go with a lot of patience, dress formally. Obviously, your attire at court is very important. But go with a lot of patience. Unfortunately, that is the one thing that you need at Children's Court, and it's the one thing that this profession has taught me, is a lot of patience, sitting, waiting for your matter to be called, and not losing hope.
Absolutely. Spoken like a true attorney. You've given us four tidbits of advice in that one sentence. So, Leigh, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. For those watching, I'm talking to Leigh Govender. She is an attorney at Vermeulen Attorneys, and she does quite a lot of children's court matters. Thanks so much, Leigh. Folks, this has been a Think Legal Conversation, 10 things you need to know about Children's Court, and I will see you all next time. Thank you very much.
The information contained in this video is distributed free of charge for educational purposes. Whilst we have taken all reasonable steps to ensure that the information contained herein is correct and up to date, insofar as the law in South Africa is concerned, the law remains a nuanced and complex field of study, replete with many exceptions and conditions. Please, therefore, do not utilize this information as legal advice, which it is not. When in doubt, consult with a legal professional. For more information, please feel free to contact our offices.